by the Bill of Rights from government regulations. For centuries prior to this, it has been understood that a corporation was a separate kind of person, an artificial person. In particular, when a group of people want to go into business together, they file to a state for a charter. Once the charter is granted, the law treats the business as if it were one person, so that they can do such things as enter into contracts, file lawsuits, and own property. This gives the corporations a limited kind of legal personhood, and that's perfectly okay. Corporations need to be able to function that way. We are not seeking a change to that. Well, that's really different from saying that they have all the rights of people under the Constitution. These are natural rights that are inherently part of who we are as human beings. We support local businesses and local corporations. They are the backbone of our local economy. This bill will not change the way they do their business. The laws controlling how they run their businesses are well established. These businesses will retain their legal personhood. What we object to is when big corporations, not our local businesses, use their claims to personal protections under the Constitution. Laws passed to protect our health, environment, and public interest have been overturned in the courts by corporations claiming their rights as persons under the Constitution. These legal precedents led to the 2010 Supreme Court decision in Citizens United v. FEC, in which the court ruled the parts of federal campaign finance law passed by Congress were unconstitutional, based on their belief that corporations have constitutional rights, and money spent in elections is protected free speech under the First Amendment. Corporations and billionaires can now spend unlimited amounts of money to influence elections, as long as that money is not donated directly to the candidates or the political party. Thus, the birth of the super PAC and the other dark money operations. So what are the problems we need to address? One, we are living in a legal system that has given global corporations the ability to go to court and overturn public interest laws. And two, Congress and the states no longer have the power to regulate campaign finance in order to achieve what we all believe is a bedrock of our democracy, equal representation for all. So how can we fix these problems? A constitutional amendment is the only lasting way that people can overturn Supreme Court decisions. The amendment must overturn these two most anti-democratic court findings by affirming that, one, the rights protected by the Constitution are the rights of human individuals only, and two, the spending of money to influence elections is not protected free speech under the First Amendment, and therefore Congress and the states shall regulate it. Question 2 is a chance for Massachusetts voters to demonstrate support for this two-plank amendment. Then once passed, it sets up a Citizens Commission to work during 2019 to advance the amendment in Massachusetts. The committee will consist of 15 citizens reflecting a range of geographic, political, and demographic backgrounds. The members will be appointed by the Governor, Secretary of the State, Attorney General, President of the Senate, and Speaker of the House. Each will nominate 3 people. The Commission will research, hold hearings, and make recommendations towards drafting, promoting, proposing, and ratifying such a constitutional amendment. Have the people ever had to overturn Supreme Court decisions before? Yes. The Supreme Court has got it tragically wrong before. The Supreme Court ruled that both African Americans and women were not equal citizens, and that 18-year-olds fighting in Vietnam did not have the right to vote in local elections. to reverse these mistakes by Supreme Courts. The people have won constitutional amendments, and we can do it again. Today, I'm asking you to help correct the errors inherent in Citizens United. I urge you to vote yes on question 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. If I don't bring my glasses, I can't see a thing. Okay. The no speaker is Paul Craney for question 2. He's a spokesperson and board member for the Mass Fiscal Alliance. Paul is a first-generation American whose mother immigrated to the United States from Mexico City, Mexico. A graduate of Gordon College, Paul moved from the executive director to spokesperson, serving on the board of Mass Fiscal Alliance. Please welcome Paul.
Thank you, Jeff. Sounds like you got that from our website or our LinkedIn profile or something, but that's,
There's a guy on the corner.
yeah, thank you. I appreciate Leo bringing up campaign finance law. It is not an easy topic to follow, and I'll probably be your briefest speaker up here. But just briefly, show of hands, how many people actually know what Citizens United is? Besides you've heard about it, like, do you know what it actually is? Like, if someone asks you, do you know what Citizens United is, could you actually...
Explain it to us.
All right. So it's a buzz kind of word phrase that's used a lot. It is a Supreme Court decision. A group of citizens that assumed were united wanted to put together a documentary about one of the presidential candidates. And they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, you're allowed to do this documentary that talks about Hillary Clinton. That is the famous Citizens United case. Doesn't seem too bad, because what the case essentially did was it allowed individuals, which is all of us, corporations, which also includes nonprofit corporations, and unions, to all have the same amount of speech in elections. They can have an unlimited amount of speech, so long as they don't coordinate with the candidates they're trying to help elect, or the political parties. So in campaign finance law, you want to look at a few things. The 2 metrics I tell people is it has to be fair, so everyone can follow the rules, and it has to be clear, so that every side has an opportunity to follow the rules. Citizens United that happened, it gave, again, individuals, corporations, which include nonprofits, and unions the same amount of speech in elections. Prior to that, you had decades of campaign finance laws in all 50 states and the federal government that were layered on top of each other. And the Supreme Court ruled because it was becoming too murky, and a lot of times elected officials use the system to silence their opposing views or opposition. That's just the way campaign finance law oftentimes is used. So that's kind of just a brief overview. I want to talk about Citizens United, why it actually benefits, as you probably heard Leo speak, it benefits corporations. A lot of times big corporations are beaten up for that, but it actually benefits a lot of other organizations and individuals and people that want to use their speech. Oftentimes you hear about, I'm trying to remember some groups that Leo was talking about, but let's just use like ExxonMobil. Big companies that are a lot of times the boogeymen, where they come in, they sweep in elections, they spend a lot of money. What they're essentially trying to do is come out there with their speech, come out and talk about different candidates running for office or different positions, which happens a lot. But they actually do have a right for their speech. As an employer, including nonprofits, you represent a lot of individuals. You represent people that work for you, employees. You represent stakeholders, investors in your company. You also represent your customers. So Citizens United allows that these employers, which also include nonprofits and unions, to go out there and speak around election time to benefit the group of people that make up those organizations. Leo spoke a little bit about how corporations are not people. That is true. I think Mitt Romney was famous to say that corporations are people or something like that, and oftentimes it's used out of context. But on the flip side of employers having speech, a lot of times communities want to hear from their employers. A really good example I try to tell people is, obviously we have a governor's election in Massachusetts next week. A lot of times these candidates running for higher office come out with positions that impact industries in Massachusetts. For instance, the two governors have weighed in question 1. They have positions on the yes and no. I think they're divided on that. So a lot of times, in this case, hospitals or unions representing nurses will want to come out and publicly speak. A lot of times the people want to hear from those interested groups too. So they want to hear from the community hospitals. What's your position on question 1? What's the governor's and the challenger's position on question 1? So a lot of times it's not just the employers, but it's the people involved in those communities that want to hear from, the businesses, the unions, or the nonprofits that they know. So hopefully that makes some sense as far as it's not just employers or big boogeyman employers, but it's a lot of regionalized organizations that just want to go out and speak. The second thing is that question 2 would actually establish a commission or a committee, as Leo was discussing. I think there's 15 people on that committee, and he mentioned that the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President, 4 of the 5, and the Governor would have 3 votes for each, or 3 surrogates for each position. So in Massachusetts, unfortunately, that means 4 of the 5 would be Democratic. As an RTC, you can see the imbalance there. And it doesn't guarantee that the governor, who's up for re-election, if he wins, would appoint Republicans to that. So right now you have 15 people that are surrogates for elected officials who would basically be tasked with ways to regulate the public speech. And that's what this really comes down to. Do you trust elected officials to regulate the public's speech? If you do, then you should vote yes on question 2. If you have problems with that, especially the composition that I just outlined, where 4 of the 5 electeds right now are Democrats, and they have 3 votes each, then you would vote the way I'm voting, which is no. The Constitution, the First Amendment, was actually drafted just for this one reason. It felt, and it's been long-standing practice, that it feels that the public is best equipped to regulate the public speech. Not Congress, not the President, not the legislative branch. No elected official should be out there regulating speech. To put that in other perspective, and this gets a different reaction in every crowd, I mentioned this too, but how many people would be okay with President Trump and Speaker Paul Ryan regulating your speech? In this crowd, probably a little bit more. But a lot of times I say, well, how about Speaker Nancy Pelosi and President Cory Booker? The point is, when you start talking about national level, it brings it back home to you that these are elected officials who have their own interests, and you're asking them to regulate the public speech. And the third thing I would just say is, if you vote yes on question 2, this commission, which is comprised of elected officials or surrogates, is tasked with regulating your speech. The proponents of question 2 already have the amendment drafted. You heard Leo talk about it. I think he quoted it a little bit. But it basically says, it's an amendment to the U.S. Constitution that only recognizes individuals as having any constitutional rights. Let me just say that again. It's an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, so only people, individuals, would have constitutional rights. So what the heck does that mean? Well, that means places of employment, like this restaurant, nonprofit organizations, unions would all have no constitutional rights. So this goes way further than Citizens United or Campaign Finance. So this is about recognizing who actually has constitutional rights. When I talk about this with other folks and with people in the media, I often say, I can't go to Kitty's and say, I would like the personnel records of all the employees here. The manager would tell me, there's a door you can leave. Just like the North Reading Police Department can't come to Kitty's and say, I want all the personnel records. They would say, go get a search warrant. Companies have rights defended in the Constitution. You can't just go into companies and search and seizure them. And there's many other constitutional rights that nonprofits and employers and unions have. So this amendment that's already drafted just recognizes individuals. It's not saying that companies have, or nonprofits or unions have the same rights as individuals. We know that is not true. Individuals have different types of rights, but it would strip those entities of all their rights that they can exercise that they have right now. So in closing, this just comes down to one thing. Do you trust government officials, elected officials in this case, to come up with ways to regulate your speech, the public speech? If you do, vote yes on question 1. If you don't, vote no.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, now we have 10 minutes for Q&A. Does anybody have a question to ask of either of these two young, fine speakers? I think this is Irene Yule, lives in North Reading.
How did you know that? Okay, I do love the expression that you used, equal representation for all. I definitely agree with that. I think everybody in here would agree with that. And as I understand it, for this amendment, or this question, it relates to only corporations. There are a lot of candidates who are well-funded. Yes, most candidates are well-funded by small donors, large donors, corporations, and unions and all that. So up until June, I had to belong to a union. So I know that my union has well-funded many candidates. And so I'm just wondering if, I think when we spoke before, Leo, I had asked you this question, but I don't know if anything has changed yet with that. So this would limit corporations from giving unlimited funds, but does it include unions, or can unions continue to give unlimited funds?
Thank you.
The proposed amendment to the Constitution applies for campaign financing all artificial entities, whether they be corporations, or they be unions, or they be nonprofits. They are all artificial entities, as opposed to natural persons with constitutional rights. Does that address the question?
Not exactly. It's kind of so.
So nonprofits can't, so we would all be limited to $2,500 per candidate. That would be, so unions could also not contribute more than that. I mean, unions are made up of individuals, but so are corporations. But unions are probably just as, if not more, powerful than large corporations. So, and I don't know if you have an answer to that.
Do you still want to follow up?
All we're saying here is, what you're doing is specific rules here in the Commonwealth. All this amendment would do is say, the government shall regulate. What those regulations will be determined by the individual legislatures within the Commonwealth and within the other states in the United States. So individual numbers may go up, may go down, I don't know.
This is when it gets really complicated. In Massachusetts, unions, including out-of-state unions, can give to state candidates up to 15 grand. All of us can give up to 1,000, and every employer cannot even give 1 penny. So this is a perfect example of campaign finance law being used as a weapon, where you have 3 sets of winners and losers. Unions can give up to 15 grand to candidates, individuals 1,000, and employers, businesses, can't even give a penny. This amendment would not address that issue. This amendment to the U.S. Constitution would strip all unions, all employers, businesses, and all nonprofits of all constitutional rights, which goes way beyond campaign finance law.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question?
Eli Spicer, North Reading. So, you're saying that that it's already written, or that's what you said about it being already written. You said that it sounded like he was quoting an already written law. Yes.